welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. As always with a gifted webinar, we'll be recording this and it'll be on our website on the resources pages in a couple of days' time. So if you need to watch anything back or colleagues have missed it and you think it would be useful, that's where you can find it. Question and answer we'll do at the end. We have over 60 people registered today. So far easier if we do all the questions at the end. If you could pop those in the Q&A and not the chat, that would be great if you can, just so we've got one thing to monitor because it's just Gemma and I here today. So on that note, thank you, Gemma, for joining me. Gemma and I have worked together on and off for, 11, 12 years, Gemma, on different Addenbrooke's projects. So it's great to be co-presenting from that perspective, but also because Gemma's got such great experience in this sector, so it's wonderful that she's joining us today to share her wisdom on NHS fundraising.
Oh, thanks, Amy. So yes, I've been in fundraising for almost 12 years. Like many of you, I'm utterly passionate about it and can see lots of opportunity for us, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm Director of Fundraising at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge.
Fantastic. Right, so let's start by just having a little bit of look at the impact of COVID over the last year. So, what a year it's been, whether there's been many positives, but it's also been an incredibly challenging year as well in the fundraising sphere. So last autumn at Gifted, we conducted a survey across all charitable sectors, but these results here are taken from the health sector, so specifically relate to what we're talking to today. And just a few statistics to show actually how resilient the health sector was in its fundraising in the last year. So those charts there, the top bar of the green there is 29%, which said that the fundraising was actually more successful than you'd budgeted for, which is fantastic. Not many other sectors could say that, I'll tell you. Only 14% saw a decrease. And the large amount there, the 57, was, initially we were worried, but actually those COVID funds that came through, whether, statutory funding or private individuals and grant makers stepping up and getting behind the COVID appeals and their local hospitals made all the difference. And I think that's really interesting statistic. And I think, you probably saw that reflected in your results as well, Gemma, over the last year.
We did. I think I'll talk a bit about our appeal later, but we, the yellow bar, we definitely saw people step up and give when they were already giving or in the middle of grants, and that was really reassuring.
Absolutely. So another statistic here, for those in a major capital campaign, did you pursue major gifts through the pandemic, which was really interesting. So obviously top bars, for some that wasn't applicable, they didn't have a capital programme underway. But again, within the health sector, 29% continued making those major gift asks for capital projects, and only 14 stopped all that kind of asking. And again, that's a real switch from other sectors a lot of whom paused their campaigns and focused purely on emergency. Health charities tended to plough on and keep on with their mission. Again, really interesting. And then final stat from me here, legacy giving. Would you be nervous about launching a new legacy giving program? And 100% said, no, legacy giving is more important than ever. A complete reverse from some other charities, including faith charities, particularly, they were very nervous about legacy programs. But actually those of us in health and welfare fundraising and hospital fundraising saw that actually, people recognize that this is a time to continue and to focus and keep that legacy giving program, which, as we know, is so important for long-term sustainable income. So really interesting now, I think, to show the resilience of the health and hospital sector in 2020. Yes, it was difficult, challenging year for everybody, but the sector as a whole showed real strength in its fundraising. Gemma.
I'm going to ask a rather challenging question, and I know that you can't answer me, But something that I've had my eye on since I've been director of fundraising is, how is our charity doing in relation to other charities? And the reason I looked at that is because hospitals, when you're trying to persuade them to do something, they like to see what others are doing. And so I knew from the beginning that ACT was about ninth out of the top 10 charities in the UK in terms of fundraising. But then I thought, actually, that's not an accurate measure as to how we're doing. So I did some analysis as to the percentage of fundraising income as of hospital turnover.
Yeah.
I looked at everybody who was an NHS charity back in 2019. This is quite old, really. And you can see there that I'm sure you can guess who is in the outstanding category. It's Great Ormond Street, and I'm sure it won't surprise you to know that in the good category sits the Christie and the Marsden, and things might have changed since then. But ACT sits within the average category, and I want us to aspire to be even more ambitious and to be even better. So I'm always thinking, what can we do to raise our game? And I think it's really helpful to know where you're starting from. And it will depend whether or not you're a corporate trustee or whether you're an independent charity. But what this says to me is that even before the pandemic, we as a sector have got so much opportunity. We've got so much potential for growth, and we really should be competing shoulder to shoulder with some of those major charities. And so this spurs me on. So this isn't meant to be a negative slide, but it's meant to say, do you actually know how you're doing at the moment, and how are you measuring that? Are you measuring yourself against your own targets, or are you thinking of different types of measurements? So that's why I've shown that.
I think that's a really important point to make, Gemma, that this isn't about saying, oh, you're below average. It's about saying, wow, look at the opportunity we have to grow.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly right. What should be taken from that?
Yeah. So as we know, 2020 was really a huge year for health fundraising. I think we're all in an amazing position where NHS fundraising has been thrust into the limelight. A lot of people now know that they can give to support the NHS through a donation. We all know the phenomenal achievement of NHS Charities Together with Captain Tom raising 140 million, and they built a database pretty much overnight, which I think was awe-inspiring. But I do know that from talking to other directors of fundraising that a lot of charities have had successful appeals, and I'm really pleased that we had a successful appeal. But I would say that's down to the bravery of our trustees, who said, yes, go ahead and do an emergency appeal. Yes, we'll invest in acquisition. Yes, we understand your business case for really going after growth in this period, and that really made the difference to us. So we actually ended the year better than we had anticipated, which we're really grateful for.
Absolutely. And then, we're talking the big numbers on this slide, but I know a lot of the smaller NHS charities did incredibly well. I remember speaking to Emma at Calderdale and Huddersfield. I think you're online with us today, Emma. And I was so pleased for you. You had huge success and relatively new hospital charity in terms of the development you've put into it. So yes, with some like Addenbrooke and others, we're looking at seven-figure appeals, sorry. But for others, smaller amounts have still made a phenomenal difference. And I think across the board, everyone really stepped up and got behind that emergency appeal vibe. And the next thing is to kind of look at where we go next, isn't it really, Gemma, and how we get back on track with fundraising in a more normal sense.
Yeah. I mean, if you think back to where we all were in March 2020, it was an incredibly different landscape. And I think we've all had a really different year. Amy, I'm going to ask you to skip straight on to the next one.
Yeah.
Because I think everybody had a different experience of the pandemic. And I know from talking to other fundraisers, a lot of us had to work remotely, and so that was changing entire fundraising systems and organising your thanking and banking differently, whereas other charities stayed on site and they were redeployed to help staff in the hospital. So they had I would say that that's a success, because they've deepened their partnership with the hospital. Just because they weren't doing what they had planned to do in fundraising, I would still say that that's a great thing, because the charity will be held in greater esteem. Some of us were lucky and we were able to launch emergency appeals. I'd love to know from you if any of you did similar, and what your experiences were. Maybe you thought, actually, this is our year. I know a lot of people were quite pessimistic about the year. I fortunately was surrounded by colleagues who thought, do you know what, this could be our year and we need to get out there. And we invested in donor acquisition. Did you do your stewardship differently? Did you keep doing your stewardship? So did you do that virtually? We found, much to our surprise, that we could get hold of some clinicians more readily, those who weren't on the front line or weren't redeployed, and they were really willing to reconnect with donors and talk about their experience. Even the ICU staff, when they could, they wanted to support fundraising, which was phenomenal, because actually that deepens donors' connection with the charity.
Absolutely. So other scenarios, were you about to launch your mid-capital campaign and had decided to pause that because it wasn't focused around COVID and that was your primary initiative? And if that's the case, now's the time to think about strategy and think about, has your case for support now changed? Are the people who you were targeting to fund that project or help you deliver that project still the same people or the right people? So time to sit and reflect on that, I think, and take some time before you relaunch again. Did you run virtual fundraising initiatives? Oh gosh, I think this was a learning point for all of us across the third sector, virtual fundraising. But we saw some brilliant examples of how people engaged and dependent on the charity, how they connected with their donors. And something that going forwards, we might do a lot more. We might be running hybrid events going forwards, part online, part in person. So it's something that we shouldn't just put on the back burner just because we're starting to hopefully return to something more like normal. Did you ask more or ask less? I would say certainly from our perspective at Gifted, those charities we work with who upped their game were hugely successful and pleasantly surprised by the amount of response they got to their ask, rather than those who backed off and kind of hid away a little. I think you experienced that as well, Gemma, and you're asking at ACT. You felt you were kind of pushing your boundaries in asking, but actually it was received really well.
Yeah, so end of March, when we first started working from home, we put in plans to run a big cash appeal, so a DM appeal to our own donors, and we expanded the number of people it was going to. And out of courtesy, we liaised with the hospital to make sure that they are comfortable with what we're doing and the messaging. And there was a lot of nervousness. And originally we'd intended for the letter to be signed by someone from the hospital because that adds credibility. But for speed and because of their discomfort, we decided to have that signed by our chief executive instead. So that actually was an unbelievable result and raised 250,000, whereas we'd steadily seen our income increasing from our direct marketing, having recruited a real expert in it. But we definitely asked more than we had anticipated to last year, so we ran an extra appeal as well and thought results might tail off by Christmas, but they didn't. Christmas was even better than we'd anticipated, so sometimes you just have to be a little bit brave.
Absolutely. Okay, so point 9, did you tell your donors what was happening in the hospital and forge those relationships? I know a lot of charities did, picking up the phone to major donors and communicating more widely across all kind of levels of membership and donors, and being honest and frank about what's happening. Also sharing, I guess, Gemma, in your messaging, sharing the good news of donations to date have enabled us to do X, Y, and Z for the team on the front line, etc.
Absolutely.
And then finally, did you use your time wisely? Did you plan strategically? Again, we've seen a mix across our client range and Gifted, some that really embraced the time to look at strategy and think about how to move forward. But for others, perhaps you simply didn't have time to do that because you were caught in a huge COVID emergency appeal and it took all your time. So I think, as Gemma said earlier about, when you're thinking about where to go next, think about where you are now. Perhaps just pause and reflect and think, what has happened over the last year? What did we do well? What did we do not so well? And where do we want to go in the future? So in terms of messaging for what's next, everybody is keen to hear good news stories now. We've had such a, well, more than a year now, isn't it? And who'd have thought it? But now's the time to talk about those projects that are, game changing, that will change the health landscape for years to come, because that's what people want to hear about. It's those good news stories. And moving away from that COVID-19. So, we worked with a health client over the period, and the messaging was, we were testing the feasibility of a new project, and the messaging was, don't even include COVID in the message. Focus on the brilliance of this project and deliver that as your message. So it was almost kind of adding a negative element to the message, and supporters just said, no, just focus on the future and the message. So positivity is the key. And I think going forward, we do have to acknowledge the impact of COVID-19. For some people, excuse me, that's had a massive impact on personal finance. For some charities, they've, really felt the pinch, and the economy as a whole. So we should acknowledge that, but it shouldn't be the driving force of messaging. Like we say, the driving force should be your case for support. What are these brilliant projects that are going to change healthcare? And demonstrating the future benefits. So again, looking to the future, talking about impact, that's what's really going to appeal to people over the next year in particular. So we're now going to talk through 5 key priorities for a successful and resilient fundraising programme. So first of all, as we've kind of hinted to, let's focus on where we are. So do you, your team, your trustees know what those strategic priorities are? Have they changed over the last year? And does that mean change within your team, perhaps, as well as how you allocate resource? Focus on specific things. Let's not try and do everything all at once. So either focus on one big project or have a single fundraising ask to get started and build that momentum. And say no thank you to those distractions that won't help you deliver targets. So all about focus on those key things. As we say, I just said in point D here, particularly if you're a smaller charity and there may only be yourself in the fundraising team, or you and another, focus on delivering one thing really, really well and use that to build. So you can use that case study for investment in terms of asking perhaps your trustee body to invest and help you take things to the next level, but also investment in, your donors and sharing that message, the impact message with them, and building from there.
We're seeing, Amy, that a lot of fundraisers in the NHS are feeling overwhelmed at the moment because
Absolutely.
There's so much opportunity and there's a lot of discussion about it online. And I say, if there is one thing that you do, think about what are your top priorities, and you really have to try and protect your time to work on those, because otherwise you'll end up trying to do too much and won't make as much progress. So
yeah. And have less impact ultimately, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So
the second one, and this is one of my mantras, is that you should try and behave like a successful charity, because we see all the amazing charities that are in the public mindset that are doing really, really well, and there's an awful lot that we can learn from them. And I think that there is something about knowledge sharing with other NHS charities. How did you do that? How did you do this? What was the best practice? What's really strong for you? And that's pretty much what I've done on a regular basis ever since I've been with this charity, and it has really helped to formulate my thinking. But I've also looked outside the NHS sector. I've looked at Anthony Nolan's model of community fundraising, which is based on relationship fundraising. I talked to lots of other people, and I really really think it's helped improve our strategy. So look to others, use their success to build your case, and I think that will help. The other things to think about, alongside benchmarking, which we touched on a little bit earlier, but being business minded. I find that NHS fundraisers are amazing, lovely, kind people, and sometimes we have to say to ourselves, am I doing that myself and getting my team to stuff lots of envelopes because it's cheaper? Is that really the best use of my time? Should I be spending time thinking on strategy? And this is one of the things I've encouraged my team to do, is to sometimes outsource to get the best. That is actually the best way for you to spend your budget, by getting an expert to do something that will take you days to do. So I really think that can help.
Absolutely. And I think the first point on there is particularly important about this knowledge share. So yes, as NHS charities, you are all fundraising in the same field, but the majority of the time you are not in direct competition with each other.
No.
You know, your main targets are your hospital patients. So let's share knowledge. Let's, you know, and Gemma and I have done this on numerous occasions where you come up with a plan for something and think, have I gone completely off piste here? I'm really not sure. I just need to run it past somebody who I know and I trust. And you can have those conversations to kind of give you a bit of clarity of thought. So really important on that.
Yeah. So thinking about resilience, we don't know what's going to happen over the next couple of years. And so one of the things I think is a good strategy for the majority of NHS charities is to focus on mass acquisition of donors, because actually that is going to help you with sustainability and predictable income if you can graduate those people to a committed giving, a direct debit ask. Lots of donors giving small amounts, a larger database is really going to help you weather any potential storm. I think we all love major gifts as and when they happen, but if you don't have a capital campaign, maybe, and you're a small team, maybe think about how can you actually grow your database. You can do that in a huge number of different ways. So we've done it through during the pandemic with a cold door drop, which was a new thing for us, and that helped add over 1,000 new donors to the database. We actually managed to grow the database by 40% during the pandemic, and so now we're working really hard to make sure that we keep all of those donors. Yeah. But I've spoken to Moorfields, and there's lots of little cheap techniques that you can use. So Moorfields pre-pandemic had those registration booths when patients arrive at the hospital, and they simply added a tick box that said, would you like to hear about your charity? And in the first week they added an extra 1,000 people to their database. So at Addenbrooke, I'm talking to the people responsible for patients' online charts to see if we can add similar for our charity. We run past patient mailings, and that's an investment, but they work really, really well. So there's lots of different ways that you can increase the number of people on your database, and now is the time to do it. And then once you've got those people, try and convert them to a regular gift, because if you get regular givers, they are more likely to help build your legacy pipeline. So I think, you know, the method is the advice there is there'll be tons of different ways that you can recruit new people to your database, but sometimes it's just being a little bit imaginative. It doesn't have to cost the earth.
No. And I think, you know, with regards to that legacy element, I'm sure we've all had that shock scenario where a legacy gift arrives and it was somebody, you know, who'd been given a really modest monthly amount, but you'd engaged with them and you'd continued to, share your stories with them. And that's the impact it can have.
Yeah. So again, thinking about resilience and thinking about sustainability over the next few years, I think a lot of us will be thinking about how do we raise more unrestricted funding. Certainly a conversation that I have on a regular basis with my finance director, and we see that really as a barometer for how healthy our charity is. And we know from running grateful patient programs and the way that donors give that patients like supporting their clinician and their department. And generally we see that with a first gift, but it doesn't mean that you can't upgrade someone to an unrestricted ask after they have given their first gift. We are finding lots more people are fundraising for an unrestricted ask. Our DM program this year, the majority of our appeals are going to be around unrestricted, but through clever storytelling, so that we're building that reliable income for the charity. One of the ways we're doing this is trying to reduce the number of options that we're presenting to donors. And so I think that's something that is a big headache for all of us, is this legacy that we've inherited, where there are hundreds of funds that people can give to. And I think if publicly, if you look at Gosh, if you look at St George's, if you look at other charities, Bristol, you will see that there are fewer options on their website, so that we're trying to get donors to give to where we really need them to.
Yeah.
I've covered D already. I got ahead of myself talking about great storytelling.
I think that point about the number of funds is so important, because it stops you having, £10,000 in one fund that you can't actually spend because it's too lesser amount for one thing and what have you. But also the benefit of the donor, for the donor almost, that it's quite clear where they can give to, and not lots of different funds, and taking that kind of confusion and ambiguity away as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so final point 5.
My favourite. Saved it for last. So we are really lucky as NHS charities that we have at our fingertips a wealth of warm prospects. And by that, I mean, we have people who are inclined to give to our cause if they know we exist. And I know for a fact, having recruited people from non-NHS charity backgrounds, that they come into our environment and say, oh, I can't believe how lucky you are. So this is our USP. And if we're going to change the landscape of NHS fundraising, this I really think is where we should be investing our time in. And if you look at your income, I'm certain that 75 to 95% of your income is likely to come from patients and family members, which seems to make sense. And when we did this analysis a couple of years ago, that was very much the case. And we looked at footfall through the hospital and realised that fewer than 1% of the annual footfall was actually giving to our charity. And so we made it our mission to try and reverse that trend and try and increase that percentage just even a couple of points, so that we were promoting ourselves within the hospital and using grateful patient techniques to focus on warmer prospects, to make sure that we were being strategic about our fundraising. Because from my perspective, you might go out and you might talk to schools, and you might talk to WIs, and you might talk to scout groups, and you might talk to businesses. But what I always find, particularly with businesses, is that they come in for a visit and they say, Addenbrooke saved my life. And so originally they were a grateful patient. And so actually, if you start from a grateful patient perspective, it is easier to recruit people than spending your efforts going out into the community. So you need to start with your hospital soonest. And I know already that major donor prospects are walking my hospital corridors, and we just don't know how to access them. And so we need to sort of put in place a strategy that means that they're aware of us, and that clinicians, if appropriate, are talking about philanthropy to their patients at the right time. And this will definitely grow your donor referrals. It will grow your database. And one of the things to think about is that our clinicians are our amazing ambassadors. They are our secret weapon, because clinicians are super well connected. Not necessarily through patients, it might be through their previous experience, it might be through their education, it might be through social. But if you build relationships with clinicians and you build trust, they are more likely to talk to you about how they might introduce you to someone. And that's very much a major donor technique. But what you also want is clinicians who are comfortable with talking about, I know the impact of charitable funding that it's made in my department. If someone asks me a question about how they can help, I'm willing to direct them to the charity to keep my clinical relationship protected and trust the professionals to handle that relationship for me. And actually, so that they don't go, okay, go and give to Macmillan, go and give to BHF, because actually they can be channeling people who are interested in supporting the hospital your way. So I think that's probably my top tip.
How many times have we heard, someone say, Gemma, I'll do it for Dr. So-and-so because of what they did for me? It's so powerful, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I remember you talking to me years ago about people giving to people, and that is certainly strongest in hospital fundraising.
Absolutely.
So the last thing here is I would suggest promoting your charity in your hospital. For years, I really wanted to boost awareness of our charity within the hospital. And it took me a while to get a yes, but I didn't take no for an answer. I was resilient and I kept trying. And the thing that turned that no into a yes was I said, look at Birmingham. Birmingham put in a fundraising hub and they went from 4 visitors a day to 40 visitors a day. They've done it. Please can I? And sometimes using case studies from other hospitals help you to get a decision made and help you to make progress. And so I would highly recommend that, because hospitals look to other hospitals to see what they're doing. They look to their peers, and that can often help you make progress and get a yes. So there you go, top tip.
It's almost that knowledge share again, isn't it? You know, saying to someone who's delivered it, hey, help me out, give me some stats so I can take this to my SLT and get it cleared.
Absolutely, definitely.
Yeah. So thinking about grateful patient strategies then, so this is something that Addenbrooke's have done incredibly well, and I know you're still developing, Gemma, your kind of rollout, but you had a great kind of first rollout. So tell us a bit more about what you did at ACT and how it worked for you.
So I think grateful patients is my preferred term. In the US, they use clinician-based referral systems. So this is something that is really prominent in the US, and they have a very different model to us, but it also happens in Australia, in Canada. And a few years ago, we got to thinking about, whether or not something that was tailored for our market, shall I say, would work, so that it was softer, it was more diplomatic, it was considered. And so over the years, we've actually built up a program that includes lots of different elements rather than just one thing, which they do in the States, which is philanthropy training of clinicians. And so we started with the philanthropy training, and we actually brought in an expert to help deliver that, which was really great. But what we did do is made it applicable to Addenbrooke's clinicians. So we've trained probably just over 200 now, and that's a combination of doctors, surgeons, nurses, the most senior people in the hospital, management people, and that's sort of co-delivered between me and and our American partners, but with footage of Addenbrooke's clinicians talking about the importance of fundraising and our donors talking about the joy of giving. And this is all to customize people to the fact that giving is a good thing.
Yeah.
Giving is not about money. Giving is not about clinicians asking for money. Giving is actually really important to the patient. And if clinicians do what clinicians always do, which is when someone says thank you, they go, nope, it's just part of my job. If clinicians keep doing that and pushing people away, sometimes it can leave patients feeling disenchanted.
Yeah.
And it can be a really important part of their healing. So the cornerstone of this program has been the training, which we have then taken on and trained our fundraisers to be able to deliver in the hospital. So you don't have to rely on getting big groups of people together. So I've got people that go into team meetings, into nurses meetings, into cross-departmental meetings, they go into broom cupboards, and they can deliver this training. And so, that really feels like it's something that we've rolled out successfully. And then what I realized is that as well as clinician relationships, deepening those constantly, it was also about an ethos within the charity. So even our finance team and our charitable expenditure team, if they take a phone call from someone, we didn't want them to be sort of short, sharp and direct about the answer. It was an opportunity to engage with someone, to help them, to be supportive, so that we were connecting the charity and the hospital ever more deeply. And so it really became a cross-charity ethos. The way I think we've personalised it within Addenbrooke's is that we've also think about, so that's sort of a push strategy by educating clinicians and people within the hospital, but we also needed a pull strategy, which was about promoting the charity to patients through mass awareness, through visibility in the hospital, through mass recruitment. And by that I mean past patient mailings, I mean grateful patient events where they come and hear from their favourite clinician about what's going on. It can be the kiosk in the entrance. And so really saying this hospital has a charity and we're proud of it, so that patients then go to the staff and go, what can I do? How can I help? And then lastly, I think, the really special part of the programme has been the departmental partnering, which was probably the hardest to make happen, because we set up a special team of people looking after departments. And so you have your person looking after children's and oncology and transplant and ophthalmology, and on various different levels, until we're looking after 52 of the 92 departments in the hospital, so that the departments know, in ACT, I go and talk to this person.
Yeah.
And that's really important for them, really important to help them spend the money, to help them apply for grants, to help us raise money. But that was a risk, but I'd say that's working really nicely now. So for me, this is sort of an evolution of the North American programme, to say, actually, this is a sort of a fully integrated programme. So I thought what I'd do is share a couple of headline results to give people an idea as to, the kind of things that can be achieved. This isn't the full results, but I thought it might be nice for people to understand that. So
I think for me as well, Gemma, what you've just said, particularly the kind of philanthropy training with the consultants. I remember watching a video that had been put together when you were developing this, of, I think it was an ICU consultant saying, why would people want to thank me? Half of my patients don't make it, quite frankly. And then a patient saying, but you gave my, I think it was husband, such dignity in his final days. And the balance of not wanting to accept thanks, and how you kind of get them through that, and the patient really wanting to give thanks is key part of it, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, he was known to hide in a cupboard if someone was going to thank him. But part of this is about making people feel comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And actually they feel quite uncomfortable when patients say thank you sometimes, and they don't know what to say. So part of this training is about, what do you say? How do you handle that conversation in a sensitive way, so that patients feel heard as well? So
absolutely.
Yeah. So some top line results, just to give you an idea. So we've recruited almost 6,500 patients. 78% of those have given to the charity, 26% have repeat donors. My favourite statistic is average donation. So CAF report for 2020 said that the average donation had gone up to £30, whereas for a long time it had been £20, and that's indicative of last year. Whereas actually a grateful patient donation average is £81, which I think,
that's huge.
It's a great business case, isn't it, for a charity? I'm really proud of our comms team, who, through promotion of the charity, through stewardship of staff, through thinking about staff as donors, have really put in place a lot of better communication about our impact. And we have seen through the staff survey that our awareness has increased from 45% to 96%. So that is going to help us in the long run, because that will mean that people are talking about the charity and comfortable in talking about the charity as well. So I touched on the number of departments we look after. I think we're assessing at the moment if we've spread ourselves too thin. And the programme's in constant evolution. I would say if you are a small charity, I would start with one department where you already have friendly clinicians, use it as a proof of concept, help them increase their income, and start from there. Sometimes being too ambitious, it's sort of, it gets a bit tricky. I like this example. So one of my team arranged a transplant tea and talk event in person before the pandemic with the professor of transplant to talk to current donors. And the event raised 5,000. And they was, this doesn't have to be huge gifts. This can be connecting patients and clinicians on a small basis, on an informal basis, and patients love it. And actually clinicians get a lot out of it as well.
Yeah. So those 6,400 patients, Gemma, what time span is that over roughly?
Oh, that's actually 3 years. So okay. When we started with one department.
Yeah.
And so then we expanded the departments, and then grew and grew and grew. So
brilliant.
One of the events we ran during the pandemic was meant to be in person. It's an annual event that we've run for a couple of years, where we bring people into our maternity hospital and all the staff participate and they show off their projects that have been funded by the charity. It's a bit like a summer fair. So they bring out the incubator and they bring out the resuscitaire and they talk about their research projects, and they show all the different things that the charity has funded. And that is a great way of getting lots of new interested people in, by promoting it to mums groups, by promoting it on social media. We weren't sure how it would work virtually this year, but we still had 150 new prospects who joined us online, which was a combination of live and pre-recorded videos.
Yeah.
And then the great thing about this is that after the fact, staff are brimming with happiness and enthusiasm. It's worth it for that alone, because then you go up in their estimation. And
Yeah.
this is a cost-effective way of recruiting people. A couple of years ago, one of our first past patient mailings, we now have a full program of past patient mailings, was oncology. These are letters that are sent out by the hospital on our behalf. We have a program set up with the contract and agreement.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to have an ask in them, and the oncology one raised £160,000. Recently, we've had a past patient who has given £250,000 to fund a specific haematology research project. That gives you an example of the type of major donors that you can recruit. And in my fundraiser who did that just worked in collaboration with the clinician to sit down and have a coffee, and that was the outcome.
Yeah.
So in general, we see departments increasing designated funds. They're more willing to consolidate their funds. They're more willing to spend money, and they enjoy engaging with fundraising. So I think I like to see specific results. I'm just going to whiz through a couple of pictures. So this is what our hospital entrance looks like now. We are really direct, really overt. We see this as a big advert for the fact that the hospital has a charity, and there are contactless donation points, there are cash donation points, we have displays of our merchandise, and so this is really our advert that can be either staffed or unstaffed in the hospital. And obviously it's been unstaffed for a little while, but we were very pleased to get those in. And then within the cancer directorate, we didn't have anything specific to fundraise for, so we were just talking about giving to support cancer services. So put up this huge poster, which we saw an increase in donations almost immediately. And then throughout all of the outpatient areas, there are leaflet displays, there are contactless donation points. And these leaflets are actually self-contained donation forms that people can fold up and send back to us. So I just think it's nice to see examples of how that works in practice.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gemma, for sharing what you've done at Addenbrooke's there. I think that's hugely inspirational for many other hospital charities. So just to recap then, let's just think about what are the benefits of these grateful patient programs. So obviously patients, the current patients or past patients, they're already warm. So in a way, it's an easier ask than a cold ask. They will increase both designated and unrestricted funding across the charity, therefore across the hospital, which is what you want. Really important, as Gemma touched upon, enabling supporters to say thank you as part of their own care pathway. So as patients are coming through treatments or surgeries, etc., it actually helps them to be able to say thank you. And that's a really important part of the hospital delivering care to its patients. Improving staff well-being, and that can have two sides. It can be that actual unrestricted gifts go into staff well-being projects, but also staff well-being of actually, once they've accepted being thanked, the difference that can make. And it's not just about a consultant being thanked, for example. It could be that actually the difference for one patient was the lady who brought her a cup of tea every morning, and that she stopped and had a chat, and that could be the thank you that needs to be said. So it's important that we think across the whole team as well, and not just the clinicians, I would say. obviously, new donor acquisition, critical for every charity. And Gemma's been talking about how that's particularly important at the moment, thinking about acquisition. Your brand awareness, we've just been there through the merchandise, etc., that Gemma's put up there in ACT. Building those stronger relationships with supporters, so long term, you increase that income, it becomes self-generating income because they come along the journey with you, and you can take your donors along the journey and hopefully onto regular gifts and perhaps larger gifts and ultimately legacies. So final slide to finish on before we go on to questions, just something to think about. What if everyone who visited your hospital knew that they could give to your charity as a way of saying thank you? I mean, Gemma's stats there about how many people, the footfall compared to engagement in charity and improving that would transform all our charities, wouldn't it?
Would.
So really important to think about the importance of these kind of programs and the difference that it can make to you. So we'll go on to some questions, if I can open them while I'm talking. Bear with me. We've got a couple in already, Gemma.
Yeah.
First one from Jane up there at Edinburgh Lothians. Hi, Jane. Would you say there is evidence of increased COVID-19 income cannibalizing the regular income streams? Have you noticed anything along those lines?
This is just our experience, but I would say that it's actually helped us to divert people to emergency appeal income, and that's how we wanted to spend our money. So I didn't see it as cannibalization, and what we did see, I touched on before, was people who were already giving were giving extra.
Yeah.
And so that really was our experience. So I don't think that anything was cannibalized whatsoever. I think the only income that went down was high value events.
Yeah.
And I think that was the same for everybody. That was the same at Gosh, that was the same with lots of people. But no, I wouldn't deem it as cannibalization.
I would say particularly as well across sector, lots of arts and culture organisations, for example, launched COVID emergency appeals, and actually, exactly like you said, people simply gave more and they gave additionally rather than directing from one to another. But really, really good point to think about, Jane. Corinne Bailey, how have you asked clinicians to engage with Grateful Patients programs if the money raised doesn't go to their designated fund but to a general fund? What's the messaging there?
See, that isn't quite how it works. So I've talked about increasing unrestricted funds, and I've talked about Grateful Patient fundraising. I think the thing that you have to get your head around is Grateful Patient fundraising is about giving to the area that people care about. And you really have to give them that ability. What we've done is try to avoid over restriction and to merge funds. So we did this within transplant. So we merged 6 or 7 funds into one fund that became the designated transplant fund. And that helps us as a charity spend the money better and have flexible ways of spending it. And I think that you need to accept that if you introduce a Grateful Patient program. What we are developing at the moment is an unrestricted ask, which is under the umbrella of Help Your Hospital, give to Addenbrooke's. But I think you do have to accept that patients might want to give in the first instance to the area they care about, but limiting choice is probably a good idea. And then thinking about upgrading after a couple of years is probably helpful.
So that general fund's almost the next step, isn't it? I think, of the taking the donor along.
Yeah.
Okay, Stacey, I can't see your question that's come through there. So if you wanted to put that through again, feel free. Gemma, what are your ACT's top 3 priorities for this coming year?
Okay, so I've got 5.
Okay.
I did say focus, didn't I? But I have different teams working on different things. We are fundraising 1.5 million for a new surgical robot for the hospital. We are fundraising for a children's hospital, which is an awe-inspiring task, collaborating with the university. We are prioritising donor acquisition. So we have an acquisition strategy that's integrated across the teams. We have then we're prioritising donor retention. So how do we keep donors with us? How do we inspire them? Actually 4. So the last one is a bit of planning, but those really are the top four. So there's, depending on which team you're in, there's one thing you're fundraising for, you're focusing on recruiting new donors, and you're focusing on retaining donors. And so trying to make that really simple for the team.
Excellent. Sophie is asking, we struggle to get trust support teams to help us deliver projects on site. How do you overcome this? I'm assuming you mean kind of, Sophie, as in things like Gemma was talking about, like installing, you know, the promo, etc. Any thoughts, Gemma? Maybe that you touched upon that when you spoke about using Birmingham for the example.
Yeah, I think if it is installations of things, I think making friends with your estates and facilities team, and building relationships with them really helps. But sometimes you have to do some of the project management yourself. If that wasn't your question, then drop Amy a line. I'm happy to answer it separately.
Excellent. Couple more come in. Kirsty is asking, what would your advice be to smaller charities who consider launching a program such as, you know, your Grateful Patients program, but only have a small team, for example, one full-time member? And I guess, you know, probably what we've talked about seems a bit daunting if you are, you know, a solo one-man, one-woman band at the moment. But Gemma, I'll let you answer. But from my perspective, it would be, as Gemma said, start small, start with one department and do that really well, and then start to roll it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we introduced this because when I'd started as a fundraiser at the charity, it was my job to look after the prostate cancer and the breast cancer team. And I found that by building those relationships, it really helped to boost my fundraising. And so if I were to be a sole fundraiser, that's exactly what I do. I'd start where the relationships are already warm, where there's a compelling case for support, and ideally where you've got something to fundraise for that you can articulate. But yes, I think you can tailor the programme no matter what size you are, really. Gosh has called me. We have regular conversations. They want to know all about Grateful Patient fundraising. So it's about sharing.
Absolutely. Jane again is commenting that touch points with patients and visitors can be as important as marketing materials and branding, the things you fund. So, for example, art, green space, staff, wellbeing, volunteers, which is really, really good point.
Absolutely, yeah.
Stacey is asking, we have over 200 locations within NEL-FT. The Healthway Foundation has been formed during 2020 and working to collate all location footfall, working with estates, which is proving difficult, and also to engage with lead clinicians on each location. Can you offer any advice, please?
Wow, Stacey, you have got an amazing challenge.
Absolutely.
But it could be absolutely fantastic. I would think carefully about doing some analysis about which of those locations has been good at fundraising. I would look at your funds and do some fund analysis, which is something we did. Where is most of your unsolicited income coming into anyway? Where would give you a step up? I would start small. I would build. I would have proof of concept until you've got people hammering on your door saying, we really want to partner with you.
Yeah, run that pilot like on a department, as Gemma says, that you think, you know, based on evidence will do well, and use that as your next step to say, hey, I need this data because with it I can achieve X, Y, and Z. Brilliant. They're all our questions that have come in. If anyone's got another quick one, we can skip it in, but it is just before 3 o'clock. We've kept on time, Gemma. Look at us. Fantastic. Let me just skip through. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful for you all. Thank you so much for joining us. Gemma, thank you ever so much. Invaluable advice you've given us there. If you have any questions, you need further advice on, you know, your specific scenario. And just to reiterate, you know, in these kind of conversations, we're talking about Addenbrooks who raise huge sums of money each year, but this is the kind of program that can roll out across any NHS charity, regardless of your size. And as we're saying then, it can be just starting small and gradually building, and perhaps long-term helping you to expand your team because, you know, you expand that much. So please don't be overwhelmed by it. See it as an opportunity to reflect, see where you are, and move forward from there. So contact details on the screen. I think many of you have already got a copy of our book, Gifted Fundraising, this book here. But if any of you would like a copy of that popping out in the post, just drop an email to my colleague Julie and we'll get one out to you. But thank you once again. Great to see you all online. Hope everyone is happy and well and enjoying the sunshine and a little bit more freedom. And hopefully we'll see you all soon. Thanks. Thanks, Gemma.
Bye.